I'm rising today to speak about the Green Slush Fund scandal that we have been debating here for some time, and particularly I'm speaking to the sub-amendment that changes the motion by adding, except that the, or it's going to change the amendment, which says, but it's going to add, except that the order for the committee to report back to the House within 30 sitting days shall be discharged if the Speaker has sooner laid upon the table a notice from the law clerk and parliamentary council confirming that all government institutions have fully complied with the order adopted on June the 10th, 2024 by depositing all their responsive records in an unredacted form. Stressed unredacted, because we have to stop this cover-up. So this order was originally given by the Speaker back on June the 10th, and here we are discussing the question of privilege of the Green Slush Fund that Liberals had set up to allow Liberal insiders to enrich themselves, to spend almost $400 million from taxpayers on themselves, on other Liberal friends, and violated rules that were identified by the Auditor General. You know, you look at this, you got $58 million that the Liberal appointed board on the Green Slush Fund went and shoveled out on projects that could not demonstrate any environmental development benefit or green technology. And, Madam Speaker, I just have to say, as a former chair of the Standing Committee on the Environment, the Sustainable Development Technology Canada organization had been, up until these Liberals under the industry minister, going back to Navdeep Bains when he was industry minister, had been functioning perfectly, helping small green tech funds get angel investments and direct government support to bring new products into the market, to reduce our carbon footprint, and to ensure that we were having clean land, clean air, and clean water. But trust this Liberal government, with all their history of always enriching Liberal insiders and friends, corruption going back, not that when I first got elected, we were still dealing with ad scam, which, ad scam and S&C Lavalin scandal and the We Foundation, all those things look pretty minuscule compared to this $400 million. So $58 million were given to projects that didn't even qualify under the rules of STTC. Another $334 million, or over 186 times, projects were awarded to the board members themselves who were in a conflict of interest. So they were sitting on the board, appointed by the Liberal Minister of Industry, Navdeep Bains, who was originally appointed most of these people, and they were failing to observe the rules laid out. And when the Auditor General went and looked at how dollars were being spent by SDTC, found 186 times that these Liberal insiders, these board members, failed to recuse themselves because they were giving money to themselves and to each other and to others that were connected to the board members. And finally, there's another $58 million that was handed out without even putting in place proper contribution agreements, and that they were meant to ensure that dollars were being spent properly. No follow-up, no follow-through. It was money taken and stuffed in their pockets, and luckily the Auditor General found out because of some brave whistleblowers. Now, Madam Speaker, we've been sitting here, we've been talking about how the current industry minister was blamed by the Auditor General for failing to do sufficient monitoring of SDTC, failing to look at all the alerts and red flags that were going up, decided to turn a blind eye. We know that Cycle Capital, one of the companies that received dollars, went to the direct benefit of the Minister of Environment, who had shares in Cycle Capital, and we've seen those shares now increase exponentially because of the supposed benefit of these government dollars, these hard-earned dollars from taxpayers that went and funded SDTC, which they then turned into a Green Slush Fund to allow them to continue to benefit. So, Madam Speaker, we've seen the Liberals get up in this place and for over the past few weeks arguing that we shouldn't be debating this in here, even though it is our right and our responsibility as parliamentarians to stand up against any questions of contempt of Parliament and violations of privilege, which the Speaker has found there was. And the Speaker is asking that a Parliament pronounces itself. And we believe that these records, since it clearly looks like there is criminality involved here, needs to be investigated by not just public accounts, not just Parliament itself, but by the RCMP and other police agencies. The whistleblower clearly stated in here that the true failure, and I'll just quote him here, and it says, the true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic system works, and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. He also said, I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and fiscal mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC and the public sphere. The whistleblower also said, just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the fiscal mismanagement of SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization. Again, I stress the criminal activities of this organization and of those that were participating. Madam Speaker, we've had Liberals get up and say, well, we're going to be violating charter rights. And the reality is that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is set up to protect individuals from the government, not protect the government from Parliament. And so the Liberals can no longer hide behind this veil of, so-called falsely using the Charter as the reason why we shouldn't have these documents turned over to Parliament and to the RCMP. But we need to get down to the bottom of this. And the Liberals can put an end to this once and for all, including, as the sub-amendment says, is that the order to report back to the House is not required if the government hands over the documents. That way, we can fulfill our fiduciary duty to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being used legally in this case, never mind wisely. And secondly, is that the RCMP then take these documents and start their in-depth investigation of the scandal at hand. Over the years, we have witnessed Liberals continuing violating, the basis of our democratic institutions and abusing taxpayer dollars. And all you need to look at is how they have misspent money, during the pandemic, how we had dollars that were handed out in Arrive scam, and that app turns out to be that we had to call one of the creators of Arrive scam to the bar because they refused to testify. We know that there is hundreds of millions of dollars that were never accounted for. We were told that this Arrive scam app could have been easily produced for under $500,000, and instead it was hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, the lack of proper governance, the lack of putting in the proper checks and balances allowed Arrive scam to happen. And that's what's happened here again at the Green Slush Fund, is that the Liberals didn't carry out their responsibility as the government to ensure taxpayers' dollars are being used for what they're meant for in various programs and operations of the government, and allowed SDTC to take those monies to benefit themselves, to benefit a minister, to benefit close friends and allies of the Liberal Party itself. And so, Madam Speaker, we have to continue to raise this and ask the questions, and we'll continue to push for this until the Liberals turn over the money. But are we surprised by this, Madam Speaker? We know that when the Prime Minister put pressure on the first Indigenous Justice Minister of the country, the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to provide the get-out-of-jail-free card for SNC Lavalin, instead of taking the advice of his Attorney General, who is filling her responsibilities, instead of listening to Jody Wilson-Raybould, he fired her. First demoted her into Veterans Affairs and then fired her. That just goes to the length that this Prime Minister will go to ensure that his friends in, big, large, elite corporations, the Laurentian elites, are always taken care of before the ethics, the rules, the law is followed by this Liberal government. We have seen all too often the Liberals continuing to abuse our democracy, and it's starting to play out as we look at issues that are being pulled amongst Canadians, and how they have lost confidence, not just in this Prime Minister, which is now he has got the lowest level of support and lowest approval ratings than any Prime Minister in the past 30 years. But we also know that they have lost confidence in the democratic process of Parliament and in government because of the erosion caused because of the ongoing mismanagement, corruption, and the way that they have divided Canadians every step of the way. The Prime Minister of Canada has three primary responsibilities. One is to keep Canada safe. And we've seen how this government has turned its back on police officers. We just had a police officer stabbed in the neck in Winnipeg over the weekend in a confrontation. It's always Liberals' soft on crime policies that have made our streets less safe. They have hollowed out our military. We're short over 15,000 troops because of the woke policies that, again, this Prime Minister has brought forward. People are leaving in droves, and we're having trouble getting enough back in to replace them. We've seen our ships are rusting out, our fighter jets are worn out, our army has been hollowed out, and everybody that works in the Canadian Armed Forces are burnt out. So, Madam Speaker, he's failed on protecting Canadians. Second responsibility is to manage the relationship with the United States. And we're seeing how that's going right now because of his mass immigration, the problems that has created at our southern border, the U.S.'s northern border, with people going across the line illegally. And in some cases, as it was reported, we know that there has been a number of people who have been charged for wanting to commit terrorism in the United States that have crossed from Canada. And that's because of this uncontrolled immigration. That doesn't bode well with the Americans. And so we have the out-of-control fentanyl crisis, which the Liberals have failed to address. And so as we continue to see these types of issues fall down, then, how do you protect Canada when you're not properly managing that relationship with the United States? And the third responsibility of the Prime Minister of Canada, Madam Speaker, is to keep Canada united. But this Liberal government has consistently always divided Canadians by race, by religion, by ethnicity, by dividing East against West, urban against rural. And every policy that they bring forward is they calculate that those divisions play well into their political future. So, Madam Speaker, when you are looking at, why the Liberals do what they do and why they always continue to have corrupt scandals like we're dealing with here again, it all is due to the reality that this Prime Minister, this Cabinet, has not stepped up to the plate for the right reasons. Instead of protecting Canada, they've decided to hollow out our military, to disrespect our police officers across this country. They have constantly underfunded what is needed to properly keep us safe. Because they're taking those dollars to invest in themselves. And the Green Slush Fund is a prime example of that. You know, Madam Speaker, when we finally have that carbon tax election and Canadians have a chance to vote for change, we'll be able to actually see how the dollars, those hard-earned dollars that Canadians pay in taxes every year, how they've been misappropriated, how they have gone to helping out friends like those that work at the Sustainable Development Technology Center, or a council, how we remain concerned about the overall state of this country that these Liberals under this Prime Minister are leaving us with. It's going to be a lot of work, we know that. But we're prepared to do that work as Conservatives with our great leader from our great leader. We got a fantastic leader in the official opposition. Now, like Madam Speaker, in my last few minutes here, you know, what we know is that the Green Slush Fund, SDTC, is a federal funded nonprofit that receives roughly about $100 million a year. So you can say that over the last 4 years, since we're talking about $400 million, all those monies have been used to the benefit of Liberal insiders and friends. And has actually gone to the financial benefit of the Minister of Environment himself. We know that all those people were put in place by the former Industry Minister, Navdeep Bains, who fired the previous board because they wouldn't do what he wanted. And so that put us in a situation where the Auditor General has done her work, has found wrongdoing, has found that the board directors refused to recuse themselves from conflict of interest, where they awarded themselves on 186 different times dollars in the amount of $334 million of the scandal that actually has gone to their own personal benefit. We know that these problems persisted, and the current Minister of Industry turned a blind eye. We know through the Auditor General's investigation and audit, and we know that the whistleblower believes that there is criminality, Madam Speaker. And we are confident, as the official opposition, that the RCMP will be able to conduct their investigations if they receive documents unredacted. And that's why this motion and the amendment and the sub-amendment presses upon the government to do the right thing, to provide the documents, and they can put an end to this debate on the motion of privilege. And finally, Madam Speaker, I would just say that it is us as parliamentarians that are at the biggest risk of losing the support of Canadians when we fail to act upon things that are not just unethical, but are actually criminal in nature, so that we can drill down on the things that rebuild that confidence and trust between us as those who have been elected, and of course build trust with the people that put us here. Canadians expect more, and they expect better. And every time that we have to stand up in this place and talk about the corruption, the misuse and misappropriation of taxpayer dollars that they work so hard in these difficult times, and cost of living is out of control because of the carbon tax, when we know that housing is getting more and more difficult for so many people, when we know that these huge deficits and the printing of money is earning up inflation and making life more difficult, and that crime on our streets is out of control, we know, Madam Speaker, that it's time for change, and Conservatives are prepared to make that change.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Deputy First Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to first tell the member I thank you for that speech. It was very refreshing to hear a Conservative just speak off the cuff and not read out an AI-generated speech for him, so I appreciate that. I noticed that he spoke at, very importantly, and I would agree with him, about our military and supporting our military. But I'm wondering if he can reflect on the fact that the only time in modern history where our military spending dropped below 1% of our GDP was while he was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Defense. That was the only time. So it's very rich for him to come in here and say we have to spend more on our military when he was directly responsible for allowing it to get below 1%. But let's not talk about the past. I'm willing to focus on the future, Madam Speaker. My question for him is very simple. This government has showed our path on how we're going to get to approximately 1.8%. and how we will go beyond that to achieve our NATO target of 2%. I know while he and I were on the Defense Committee together, we both agreed it should be at 2%. So can he stand up today and say that as, if elected to form government, will the Conservatives actually commit to increasing to 2% of GDP, yes or no?
Order! The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake.
Madam Speaker, well, first I'd like to set the record straight. We know that from the parliamentary budget officer that they just did some recalculations, and that Liberals' projections of increasing spending up to even 1.7% is a falsehood, because they didn't even base it upon the same GDP numbers that the Department of Finance uses. I'd also like to point out that the Library of Parliament discovered that when you actually compare apples to apples, when we were looking at actual national defense numbers, when we were in a time of peace in 2014, there was no invasion in Ukraine happening yet, and no, there wasn't. You know, and we were wrapped up our war efforts in Afghanistan, and we're downsizing our military efforts in Iraq and Syria. That, yeah, sure, we rolled down those operations, defense spending dropped. But, Madam Speaker, guess what? When the Library of Parliament looked at the numbers, actual national defense expenditures in the department right now by these Liberals is 0.95%. It's only when the Madam Speaker, member from Winnipeg North, who doesn't know the numbers, I'll just explain to him that right now, if the only way that they got their numbers up is 2017, they asked permission from NATO to add in things, and there's an order paper question that just proved it, of $6.5 billion from veterans' pensions, defense employees' pensions, and Coast Guard, which is not a paramilitary organization.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove. Oh, the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to say, as we go into 6 weeks of filibuster, we believe this should come to a vote. We support the motion. We want to get to the bottom of the STDC scandal. And as you know, Madam Speaker, when it came to the SNC-Lavalin scandal, the We Charity scandal, it was NDP MPs that actually got to the bottom of it, because we believe Canadians need to get answers. Now, I always appreciate my colleague, and he has a long history in this House. I have a lot of respect for him. I do not have any respect at all for the record of the Harper regime, Madam Speaker, because they were the most corrupt government in Canadian history, the most dishonest government in Canadian history. And I just want to cite some of the scandals. The ATS scandal was $400 million. The G8 scandal, remember the gazebos, $1 billion. The Phoenix Pay scandal, $2.2 billion, $3.1 billion lost in the anti-terrorism funding. The Senate scandals, and I could go on and on and on. Now, none of these Conservatives would permit us to get answers to. I wanted to ask my colleague very simply, does he regret the Harper government shut down and refused to give answers and transparency in every single one of those scandals? Does he regret what the Harper regime did to Canadians?
Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Madam Speaker, the member from Burnaby has a very interesting revisionist history around here. But I'll say what, they have been the party that has kept these guys in power. The Liberals are here because of the ongoing support of the NDP. Now, the leader of the NDP said going into the by-elections that we had this fall that he had torn up the agreement just so that they could win their seat back in Elmwood-Transcona. A very thin margin in that by-election. And they were losing up until that point because when I was on the doors in Elmwood-Transcona, every one of them were sick and tired of the NDP supporting this Prime Minister and the Liberals. So that coalition down with these guys here have allowed us to get to this point. And it was the NDP that helped us shut down the debate and turning over the documents that we've needed in the past, and they're going to, right now, allowing debate to go on. But I can tell you, if they at all support a closure motion brought forward by the Liberal government, that again will prove the fact that the NDP have the six. They've got the back of the Liberals, and the coalition is alive and well.
Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my friend and colleague, the member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman, for his thoughtful speech on the Liberals' latest scandal, the Green Slush Fund. Now, I was happy to hear him in his speech make reference to the specious arguments based on the Charter that the Liberals are now advancing late in the day to justify their non-compliance with a perfectly legitimate order of this Parliament. Now, he left us with no doubt what he thought of those arguments, but my question is more about timing and procedure. The time to have raised those arguments would have been in advance of the order having been made back in June 2024, as referenced even by the Speaker in his judgment. And I wonder what my colleague could say about that, just about the timing of the procedures and how the Liberals are now using this specious argument to hide behind.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Well, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the question from my colleague and for his hard work on making sure that we're always standing up against corruption. We're standing up for democracy. We're standing up for the proper governance of the House of Commons and of Cabinet. And meanwhile, what we're witnessing is the Liberals refusing to cooperate with the Speaker, refusing to hand over the documents so the RCMP can do their work. And we've been doing this now for over 5 months, coming on 6 months next week, that we've been waiting for the documents. The Auditor General found that there was a violation of the rules, that the board refused to recuse themselves, Madam Speaker, when they were enriching themselves instead of leaving the room. And what would even be better is if those Liberal appointees never even made an application or took those dollars in the first place. They were there to make sure that the green tech companies across this country were getting the money they need, and instead they enriched themselves, which is all wrong.
For Avalon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to try and correct history that the member spoke about. And I know he said history would repeat itself or whatever, but I want to talk about when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. His first statement he made about Atlantic Canadians was they had a defeatist attitude. They wanted to survive on EI and not get out and find jobs. As well, Stephen Harper, talking about protecting people, shut down the search and rescue facility of Coast Guard in St. John's. That was shut down by Stephen Harper, opened by this government when we came to power. But again, of course, they didn't care about Newfoundland. Premier Williams at the time felt so dismayed by the Stephen Harper government that he flew the Canada flag upside down at Confederation Building. So that's how disgusting. So comment on that for a previous government.
For Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Madam Speaker, I guess the bigger question is that member was reportedly, or actually talked publicly about signing the letter to remove the Prime Minister as leader of the Liberal Party. The bigger question is, why isn't he continuing to have that fight to do the right thing for Canada and remove one individual here that continues to make us less safe, continues to squander the dollars, continues to ensure that we can't make those investments in things like Coast Guard, Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP. They'd rather take those dollars, as Liberals, they'd rather take the dollars to build back our Canadian Armed Forces and stuff that into, and being misappropriated by Liberal insiders that were sitting on the Green Slush Fund. That's the answer that we need, is why not get rid of your Prime Minister?